All right, my name is Christopher ORY. I'm not going to introduce myself very much. I'm going to get right into it because this is about an hour-long presentation that I have squished into the time frame of 20 minutes. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about card battle games, about how they make money, how they retain, and what can be adopted from them and other game designs to increase all the awesome in your games that you're trying to make. So what is a card battle game? Well, a card battle game is not a collectible card game. They're not the same thing. Rage of the Bahamut is not Magic the Gathering. And it sounds really great for your story if you drop the name Richard Garfield into a conversation about your product, but the conversation gets really convoluted because these two things can't really be comparable, even though people online will talk about them as if they're the same thing. One of these genres make a lot of money online. One of them doesn't make any money online, collectible card games being the sad one. What are examples of collectible card games online? We have Hearthstone that's coming out by a company called Blizzard. Cabals, which is a very good game that I recommend but doesn't make very much money. It top ranked at 1188 grossing and is currently not in the top 1,000 in the App Store. SoulForge is a game developed by Richard Garfield, co-created, as a free-to-play virtual collectible card game. It peaked at 152 grossing and is currently also not in the top 1,000. And then we'll talk about the monster, which is Magic the Gathering, peaked at 32nd overall and 20 top grossing just after its release. Currently, it's sitting at 332 rank and 102 gross. And that might be some pretty impressive numbers. But once you start considering the huge popularity and dedicated fan base and sheer volume of cash that Magic the Gathering players throw into this game, it's really not that impressive. They don't spend money on this game online, they spend it in the real world. So what are some card battle games that are successful? We've heard about most of them. We have Marvel War of Heroes, Rage of Bahamut. Puzzle and Dragons, surprisingly enough, is basically a card battle game, and Blood Brothers. And so what makes card battle games so successful? We're going to look at that through the lens of the acquisition funnel, and most of you should be pretty aware of this and understand it relatively well. So we're going to start right off. I'm going to skip over a lot of it, actually. We're going to start off with targeting. Targeting is important, but it has standard practices amongst mobile games. So keeping to the schedule, we're going to kind of go over this really, really quickly. I'm going to flash through some slides, take some pictures of it, and if you're watching this online, then stop and look up the things that you see because they're kind of important. This is Bartle's player type theory. Don't use it. This is Bartle. He'll tell you why at Casual Connect Europe 2012. The full video is online. This is a very smart guy. This is his very smart website, and he's making an incredibly interesting academic research into gamer psychographics that can be transcend across all games. Look him up. He's the creative director at Ubisoft. This is Timmy, Johnny, and Spike. This is Wizards of the Coast's dedicated psychographic profiling tool that they use when they're talking about their players of Magic the Gathering and their game. It's designed specifically for collectible card games, and all you have to do is Google Timmy, Johnny, and Spike Revise. Make sure you see the Revise because that's the full one, and they'll tell you all about it with nothing hidden. So moving forward, acquire. So acquisition is the specialty of a different kind of egghead than me. So I'm not going to talk much about it at all, but I would be remiss if I didn't discuss a little bit about DNA's acquisition spend on Rage of Bahamut. This is important to mention because it could be cited as one of the genre's reasons for being successful. They threw money at this until they had a dedicated fan base. And it's probably more than any of you have in your war chest. There's at least 6 zeros behind this in their initial spend. And the strategy here was probably to introduce a new genre, just throw a lot of money at it, and then be able to move dedicated players from one game to the next in the same genre, lowering acquisition costs over the entire spectrum. And now that I've spent the first 5 minutes of my talk, well, 4 minutes of my talk talking to you about what I'm not going to talk to you about, let's get to what I came here to talk to you about, which is retention. So this is our good friend Scott Foe, and he is apt to say, if you get them back for play 2, day 2, week 2, they will pay you. And that rhymes. And he's a poet. So yes, it's very important because acquisition, as he notes, and retention and monetization are invariably linked together. So in order to really dive into the brilliance around how these games successfully addressed retention, we need to talk a little bit about something called semiotics. Now, semiotics is the study of linguistic and non-linguistic sign systems. That's a really haughty explanation, and to oversimplify, it is in part the study of how we use language to label things for use. This is a chair. My understanding of this chair changes depending on its use at a given moment. In this situation, the chair is a seat. In this situation, the chair is a stool. And my life may depend on me being able to understand that in this situation, I can use the chair as firewood. Humans learn to use language to alter things depending on their use pretty early on, so much that we do it hundreds of times a day without even thinking about it. Game mechanics rely on semiotics, but this language is also learned, which brings us to Tanzania. I was enlisted a while back to design a card game for a nonprofit organization called Reallocate. This game would be distributed to children in developing nations to teach them road safety. I created the game. It was relatively simple mechanically. It tested successfully on kids 4 to 6 here in the States. But the problem came when we tried it on our test market in Tanzania. The kids there were completely unable to grasp the concept at all. The main reason for this is I required them to have the semiotic understanding that a card could be a car. This is a labyrinth minotaur. It's a creature, obviously. When it blocks another creature, that creature does not untap during its next untap phase. Of course it doesn't, because it gets lost in the labyrinth with the minotaur. This makes total sense. The simplest thing, this is a simple thing for us in the first world because we live with abstract analogies on a daily basis. Our games inherently rely on this ability. So the children of Tanzania, they have one card game. It's a colloquial game, it has no written rules, and the closest thing that we could equate to it would be Uno. Uno also requires semiotic understanding, but what I was asking of these kids was to make the linguistic leap from understanding that a card could act like a number to understanding that a card could act like a Porsche 911. It's important to remember that this has nothing to do with intelligence, but with language. Language is learned incrementally from one step being slightly more complicated than the next. Game mechanics are linguistic. I can't express this enough. So how does this relate to retention in a card battle game? So herein lies the hook. We'll talk about onboarding. Onboarding is easiest when you don't have to do anything at all. You can hand a player a game, and it's so intuitive that they instantly understand everything there is to know about it, and you don't have to tell them anything. That's the simplest way to onboard. It almost never happens like this, and that's why we fill the first 3 game sessions with tutorials to teach our players the language they need to play our games effectively enough so that they're fun enough for them to give us enough of their money. Tutorials are boring for most players. They're a huge drop-off point. They're the largest drop-off point in our entire acquisition funnel. And as you can see here from the Rage of Bahamut screenshots, which is a standard example of the UI in most card battle games, there's a lot of information and seeming complexity. But one thing that these games did, either by design or by happenstance, was to build an incremental complexity from an already understood model. Mafia Wars, Vampires Live, and Zombie Live are hugely popular and they already train players to understand this type of complex visual language system. Card battle games had half of their onboarding work already done for them. Along with UI, the way a game plays is also linguistic, and this is called the Chord game loop. Again, we look at Rage, but the Chord game loop changes very little from card battle game to card battle game. The PvP and PvE loops are separate, but they're both very simple. In PvE, you get a new quest. You complete the quest, gaining soft currency, cards, XP, and treasure. It costs an energy resource known as stamina. Then what we do is we level up, acquire new and better cards, then obtain higher level quests and start all over again. The PvP loop is much the same, just with different resources and getting slightly different rewards. Now we'll look at the core game loop of another game that you might know, which is World of Warcraft. The loops here are almost identical. The differences you see are inherent in the differences between the free-to-play model and the subscription model. So free-to-play with the resource, subscription, no resource. A card battle game is structurally nothing more than a commonly understood RPG mechanic that uses cards to rely on the important information. This is another brilliant use of semiotics. The audience in this market of all interests and all backgrounds already know how to intuitively read abstract information on cards, be it playing cards, sports cards, magic cards, or character cards in Rage. These cards are totally irrelevant to the game design. They could be anything, but players don't have to be taught to know how to parse the information on a card. As an added advantage, cards are cheap. The art is static. There's no expectation of a uniform art style. Therefore, they can be easily outsourced, and you can provide rapid content releases because your art costs are really low and really quick. Besides drafting other popular games and models, the thing that helps their retention as well is simplicity. The mechanics in these games are dirt simple. Questing involves repeatedly tapping an unmissable area of the screen in an unmissable amount of time. The combat is completely automated so that you can skip it entirely and just see the outcome. All strategy is based on collection and deck composition. It keeps the game light for early players, scales easily in depth for the late game audience, and favors monetizing users who collect the most cards. The combination of simplicity, very short possible session times, and with piles of rewards makes for an incredibly exciting and addictive experience. One of the innovations in this genre is how these games are able to provide these piles of rewards without blowing out their economy. There are two mechanics built into the economy that act not only as huge resource sinks, but also as huge monetization funnels. And that is the enhance and the fusion mechanic. These two work together. Cards have their own levels and they gain experience. As cards become more powerful, as cards gain levels, they become more powerful. Through the course of the game, the player will obtain many more cards than are directly useful to him. The player feeds his trash cards to his useful cards, giving them levels and experience. A player will also gain duplicates of the cards he already has. He fuses these cards together to create a more powerful version of the original card. This does a few things. First, it creates a system where everything the player is given, regardless of rarity or value, is desirable because everything can be put directly towards obtaining what the player wants, and that is improved versions of the cards that player likes. The player can be given piles of rewards and will happily throw those rewards down a resource sink. Thereby, a stable economy is maintained. Secondly, duplicates become desirable instead of a drag. Players will continue to grind for a card they like even after they've already obtained one, so they can fuse the two to create a stronger version. Then they will grind for two more to fuse those two together so they can fuse it to the first card to make an even stronger version again, and this so on and so forth forever. Throughout this entire process, these games allow the player to remove friction with premium currency, but they will never allow the player to purchase a card that they want directly. The event system is the last retention tool that these games that I'm going to talk about. These systems vary from game to game, and they're fairly complex, generally targeted later stage players. Here is a schedule. You can go to this website and you can look up the Puzzle and Dragon event schedule and reward schedule and kind of understand how it works. It's pretty complicated, and I'm actually going to skip over this because I'm running out of time. So there's daily events, weekly events, monthly events. Players will grind out to prepare for events before they come up and check in often to check out to make sure they didn't miss out on the surprise events when they come up. So let's look at monetization. The thing that these card battle games do really, really well is make monetization fun. Players will spend more money if the experience of purchasing is enjoyable, and that's really important. To do this, card battle games employ casino mechanics and yay, old collection. Collecting things is fun, and collecting things that do cool things is even more fun. Magic the Gathering proved this a really long time ago, and as I mentioned before, players cannot purchase cards they want, but instead obtain cards through buying random packs of cards that contain anywhere from 1 to 10 cards, depending on the selection. So let's look at the drop percentages from premium packs of cards in Rage, broken down by rarity. High normal drops at 3.5% of the time. Rare drops are 60% of the time. That's weird. You can see that a 2-star card drops twice as often as a 1-star card. And this is smart since a card increases in strength as rarity increases. Getting a 1-star card really, really sucks. They drop often enough to make the 2-star card feel like a success and to remind the player that they're not always getting a raw deal. High rare drops happen at 15% of the time, S rares drop at 1% of the time, and SS rares, which I can only assume stands for super special, drops 0.5% of the time. And let's look at Magic the Gathering. How does this stack up? Well, Magic the Gathering sets are released every 3 months. There are, give or take, 350 cards in a set, unique cards in a set. Packs come in 15 card boosters. Each booster contains 1 land, which is a resource, 10 commons, 3 uncommons, 1 rare or mythic rare. Mythic rares drop 1 out of every 7 packs. And also, every 1 in 4 pack replaces a card in that pack with a foil card that could be of any rarity. This means you could actually get 2 mythic rares in a pack if you're super lucky. Which rarity table is better? Magic has been successful with its structure for 20 years. Should you use it? No. Magic's rarity table is set up not only to maintain game balance with a game that has an international pro tournament structure, but also to promote secondary market and keep retailers happy, facilitate trading, and maintain collector values of the cards. Rage's structure doesn't need to concern itself with any of that. It's set up just to make money. And all rarities can be tuned under the hood for player, region, and purchasing behavior. So, speaking about money, it would be remiss of me not to talk about a thing called Compu Gacha. Compu Gacha means complete gacha, and complete gacha means these guys. How this works. A player makes a blind random purchase of an item. This item is part of a set that makes up different sets. By collecting a full set of these items, you get a reward of a super rare item that can only be achieved through collecting this set. Maybe. The catch is that in order to get the rare item, one of these items in the set must be an extra rare version of itself, like having a golden ticket stuck to it, but the ticket is invisible. It could be any of the items, but the player doesn't know if any of the items have the ticket until the set is collected. If it does, the reward is given. If it doesn't, then it's time to collect another set. This method of monetization has been so successful in Japan that it's now regulated by the government. All card battle games in some form use Compu Gacha. Now, this mechanic gets especially evil if you combine it with PvP. In this example, a player has to collect this set of crystals to get this card. The crystals are dropped from PvE. The other way the player can obtain the crystals is by stealing it from a player you defeated in PvP, and you can even search for opponents by loot you want to steal when going after somebody in PvP. You can see that completing sets now has become a race. Grind them out or steal them before someone else comes along and takes the components you need from you. Both PvP and PvE require resources that are either replenished over time or filled with premium purchase. Completing a set, especially later in the game, with items when items become more rare, gets increasingly more difficult if you plan on sitting around waiting for your stamina or your attack to replenish on your own. So you're going to pay some money. And that's a little thing. Right. So Compu Gacha was developed with physical goods and vending machines. Another tactic derived from physical marketing is loyalty programs. In Ayakashi Ghost Guild, players are given these rewards which can be exchanged for special items, for logging in on weekends, and purchasing a number of packs. Here's another successful example of a loyalty program. Don't think about how much you're smoking, think about it in terms of that patio furniture. So, Puzzle & Dragons brilliantly brought back a long-dead mechanic which has worked amazingly well for them. And that is the use of tokens to pay to continue. Dungeons in Puzzles & Dragons is incredibly difficult and can take hours to complete, especially the special dungeons. Getting to the final boss and then losing is a pretty painful experience. So the game allows the player to continue the battle at the expense of a small amount of virtual currency. Even more painful is that throughout the dungeon, the game shows you everything that you've won by defeating the monsters and keeps a visual inventory of it as you're playing. Being defeated not only loses the energy you spent on entering the dungeon, but also all that great loot that you've gained during your time there. Losing something that you feel like you've already earned is much more painful of an experience than having to start all over again. So, if the player is defeated, the game requires an additional premium for the player to keep the loot, even if he decided to pay to continue. This is where most players monetize, and it's been incredibly effective. And I didn't press any buttons while I was talking, so we're going to move forward. So the last step on our journey is through the funnel is Reengage. And again, it's a short talk, and I'm not that kind of egghead, so we're going to skip over this as well. So what kind of takeaways do we have here? Card battle games are not revolutionary, and they're not even a new genre. They're simple, stripped-down, role-playing games that use cards instead of characters. They effectively strip mine past practices and standard proven marketing methods and deftly translated them into game mechanics to make spending fun. Regardless of the type of game that you're making, the ability to use established language makes success much, much easier. But what's really important to remember is that none of this will work if you don't make a good game. All the tricks and proven methods that you do are no good if players are not enjoying the experience that you've given them. And lastly, a lot of the things that I mentioned here may seem pretty evil, but the ticket to white hat practices is transparency. Players will happily partake in your crooked monetization schemes as long as they feel like you're not trying to trick them, and it's fun. Players like to feel like they're smart, and what is smarter than recognizing and avoiding some shifty game peddler's schemes? Welcome the player in, let them know what they're getting into, and they will hang out, give you their expendable cash, and keep coming back. This is also a proven strategy. Thank you. So any questions? Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
So what do you think about synchronous PvP in card battle games? It's not very common.
Yeah, no, it's not very fun. And asynchronous or synchronous? Synchronous. Well, one of the reasons why it's not very fun is you don't have to do anything in card battle games. You just let it go at each other, and it goes. And
Puzzle and Dragons, it's semi-action. Puzzle and Dragons is semi-skill, right?
yeah, it is semi-skill, but there's not terribly much PvP in it. It's mostly PvE, and the game probably would be ruined if it was PvP. And to be honest, I think that the technology barrier right now for synchronous PvP is what's keeping good PvP from happening in mobile games. And I think something simple like this would be a great place to start. But you would, again, have to make PvP much more interesting and have it be more skill-based instead of just luck-based. And there is a skill in deck building, but when it comes down to it, it's kind of boring just to watch your cards butt up against each other. So, yeah.
Do you think it would work, or could you imagine a scenario where you have such a game, but you haven't actually implemented all of the features yet, like what you're describing, and rolling them in incrementally, starting with a game with some of the features, and then adding more, and then adding the foil cards, and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how Magic did it. I mean, Magic didn't have any foil cards. They didn't have any epic rares. They didn't have any planeswalkers. You know, and over time, and that's actually really smart because, like I said, game mechanics are linguistic. So if you can take a core game and start building on it slowly and complexity on the complexity of the previous step, then you're going to be able to grow a base of really smart, really verbal gamers that are going to understand your game really, really well, instead of trying to give them it all at once. And yeah, definitely adding it, as long as you don't take anything away from them. Don't ever take anything away from your gamers. Give them more, but like even if it is not making you money and it hurts, they'll run away if you take anything away from them. So yeah, that would be my only warning.
With the market where we already have games like Magic or whatever, and they're already physical games and they've come into the digital realm, how would you suggest we take a new idea and make sure it gets heard, in a market that's already dominated by the powerhouses we all know and play ourselves?
You're talking about a collectible card game specifically.
Yeah, I mean, or just using the same mechanics even. Would it work to put these mechanics into a different type of game entirely?
Part of this talk, in my longer talk, I show all of the collectible card games that have existed over the last 20 years. I mean, there's hundreds of them, and there is currently 8 that still exist and are played. I mean, there's a few more, but these games don't last very long because Magic is such a huge dominant structure. I mean, it's like saying I'm going to make a new Sesame Street. Well, there's already Sesame Street out there, and you're probably going to fail. So it's hard. I mean, collectible card games are very, very hard, especially to do virtually because most people don't play virtually, and they're just not making any money. I was really hopeful for SoulForge because it's an incredibly good game, but it's just not making any money. So
it would probably be better to put that kind of this kind of a structure into a different game.
yeah, definitely. I think all of this stuff works in different game formats. Like you can take all of this stuff out and put it into different games, and I think that's kind of where I wanted to go with this discussion was that this stuff is very useful. Maybe not necessarily in the genre because it's already really saturated, but you can take these things and figure out how to use them in your game, whatever that may be, platformer or whatever. They'll work. They'll work. So.
Wow. So, guys, let's give it up for Mr. ORY.